This is the MeatEater podcast coming at you shirtless, severely bug-bitten, and in my case, underwearless.
We hunt the MeatEater podcast.
You can't predict anything.
The MeatEater podcast is brought to you by First Light. Whether you're checking trail cams, hanging deer stands, or scouting for elk, First Light has performance apparel to support every hunter in every environment. Check it out at firstlight.com. FIRSTLITE.com. Joined today by Jim Baichtal, who doesn't shoot shit unless he can shoot it with a muzzleloader.
I know how to use a rifle. I just choose not to.
When did you quit?
1986.
What happened?
I decided I wanted to get close with a single shot.
But you can still get close to the single. You wanted to force yourself to get close to the single
That's right.
shot. What'd you shoot prior to shooting a muzzleloader?
I got my dad's 30-06, a 721 that he bought in 1950.
Okay.
Remington 721.
And that was your gun.
I still have it. I still hunt with it. I take my dad with me every year. We go out and do a hunt together, and then I put him away and I take the muzzleloader out.
So you house his gun for him.
My father's passed away, and so
I
made a promise to him the day he died that him and I'd go hunting together every year.
So you take it out.
I take it out and we go hunting together every year.
All right.
Works.
But then other than that, all muzzleloader all the time.
I try to. Sometimes I falter. Some days it's really wet up in southeast Alaska.
Okay.
Makes it really hard to do flintlocks and percussion and stuff like that.
Yeah, because you live in the worst place to be a muzzleloader hunter in the world.
Pretty much. But, I figure all the people that came before us, the English and the Russian trappers and the natives who got muzzleloaders for trade items and stuff like that, they figured it out.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I use a wool bag. I place my firearm in a wool bag, and the wool swells up, keeps the moisture from getting in there, and I think I've had one or two times in 35 years of being up there that cap hasn't gone off.
No kidding.
Yeah.
No, our friend in common, Jim Heffelfinger, said if you look at the Alaska muzzleloader records, it reads like a Baichtal phone book.
That's a great line. That's a great line.
And they're all named Jim.
You submit, how many state records do you have?
Quite a few.
Yeah. Well, just brag up for me. I asked you, so you're not bragging. I'm just asking a question.
I think I have over 30 deer. I have the world record, Sitka Blacktail for a muzzleloader in number 2. Somebody's got number 3, and then I have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and a bunch more.
Oh my goodness.
That's incredible, man. And you shoot flintlock or cap?
Cap. But I'm experimenting now with flintlock. That's where we've been talking back and forth. And so because I worked for Alaska Department of Fish and Game for so many years, the gentleman that was the wildlife biologist, Dave Person, was a master gun builder. And as a thank you for all the years of darting deer and following deer and stuff, he built me a beautiful, beautiful flintlock. And I've taken probably 8 or 9 deer with that flintlock, and I've got a couple smoothbore flintlocks that I've killed black bear and caribou and stuff like that with them. So,
do you have a fowling piece?
I do.
Do you shoot ducks with it?
I have killed 4 turkeys, and it doesn't have a choke, and so the best pattern I get is about 15 yards. So I set 20 yards as my maximum. I won't shoot beyond 20 yards when I call those birds in.
Got it.
Got to be close, really close.
Yeah.
There's a fowling piece, what you call a
shotgun.
Yeah, if it was specific to just birds. But during my back and forth with Jim, and it makes absolute common sense. So it's not like a big epiphany, but like the reason that the round ball and smooth bore stuck around for so long, even when technology was readily available and far surpassed it, is folks just could only have one firearm. So they'd take a smooth bore 58 caliber Hawken or whatever it got bored out to, and they use that for small game, birds.
Like whether you're pouring shot down it or jamming a lead down it or...
Yep. Exactly. So using it with one piece of shot for big game, the big solid ball, or pouring a bunch of small shot down there.
And it gives you tremendous versatility. I've hunted moose with a smoothbore flintlock in the interior, and it's a 62 caliber French fusel fin. So if we would have been French voyageurs, we would have been issued this gun.
Mm-hmm.
And you take the round ball, and I stitched the patch on, and I set it down in there, and in the morning I would go and hunt moose, and then I reached down and I pulled the round ball out and put shot down, and I went down along the river and shot a brace of grouse down along the river and put my round ball back on and hunted moose all the way back up to camp.
Got it.
So I was like super, super, super flexible.
Yeah, there's nothing more efficient than that.
No.
That's a joke.
When we were doing all of our research for our Mountain Man audiobook, we'd read these guys at night would take and at night they would put 5 buckshot in their gun, and then they'd cap it with or maybe vice versa. They'd take the rifles and put 5 buckshot in them, and then they'd cap it with a ball.
Okay.
And that was their nighttime home defense system.
I'll tell you what, must have been pulling that ball then come morning, because years and years ago, I was in the interior and I was hunting ptarmigan, and I came over a ledge and there was a beautiful bull caribou 20 yards away, and I backed off, and I had 1.25 ounces of shot, number 5 shot, and I just set a round ball down on top of that and belly crawled forward and shot that caribou. And I figured out later it about tore my shoulder off, because that was like 700 grains of lead in there when you did that. I didn't think about the equal and opposite reaction thing to recoil. I killed the caribou.
You did?
Yeah. And actually, and I had like 4 or 5 pieces of shot in the heart too. It penetrated deep enough. I could have killed him with a shot load. He was really close.
You always worked as a geologist.
Yep.
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up around Mount St. Helens country, Southwest Washington. We had a small farm there, and we had about 120 acres of timber. And that's where I disappeared into once my chores were done.
Mm-hmm. How'd you get into geology?
I was a kid. My folks decided we needed to have some kind of a family hobby, and they picked rock hounding or lapidary, where you go out and dig up petrified wood and agates and jaspers and opals and obsidian and other stuff and fossils. And somewhere, I don't know, 11, 12 years old, I got to thinking, this can't be random. We're finding this agate here because of a process, and we're finding this thunder egg here because of a process in the petrified wood. And basically that's geology. And so I always knew what I wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still looking for those answers.
How'd you come to be doing it in Alaska?
Luck.
Yeah.
I grew up listening to my grandfather. My grandfather on my father's side was in Alaska in 1919, 1920, and 21. And then he was back again in 37 through 42. And I heard all the stories of Alaska.
What was he doing?
He was a trapper. He soloed all the way down from basically the Yukon. He soloed all the way down the Yukon drainage in 1919 and 1920, and ended up in Kotzebue in the winter of 1920, trapping along the Yukon River.
Mm-hmm.
Had a canoe and was by himself going down there. And I grew up listening to all those stories and had a huge fascination. And so in 1990, there was a position opened up with the Tongass National Forest to be a geologist there, and I applied for it and luckily got it. And most Forest Service people kind of come for 3 or 4 years and move off on some other kind of thing. And I fell in love with Southeast Alaska and realized that very little was known about the geology. They'd mapped around the shoreline, but they'd never really mapped to the interior of the islands. And then I got into the whole cave and karst management thing up there, that there's thousands of caves across vast areas of the rainforest. And there was a thing called the Federal Cave Protection Act. And so we're supposed to protect caves on federal lands. And the more developed the cave areas were, the bigger the trees were. So they were direct conflict with timber management going on. So I was tasked with going out and finding those caves and mitigating the impacts of any proposed activity. So I got to explore all those woods all over Southeast Alaska. And I just fell in love with it. Just fell in love with the place and the unknown things of geology, the things that you could map, the glacial history, the uplift history, the kind of geoarchaeology side of things, like when were people on the landscape and how could I help define that?
Why is that important to map that sort of stuff?
If you have an idea of the geology, it's kind of like a soils map. It's a productivity thing. Where's the vegetation? What plants are there? Why are those plants there? How did the glaciers interact with the landscape? Why does the landscape look like it does? And that's all controlled by the bedrock geology. And Southeast Alaska is bits and pieces of continents that's been added on. So it's like this little pile up of pieces. I think we call it a terrain wreck. Its terrains are what this was in there. And so the geology is super varied as you kind of move northeast, southwest across the island. But as or it's similar as you move northeast, southwest, but as you move towards the east across there, you're just going from terrain. They all have their blocks of rock that have a similar geologic history and how they were added onto the continent. So it's a fascinating geology that again, the original mapping was around the shorelines and wherever there were mineral deposits found, but kind of the rest of that had not been worked on very much. So I partnered with the U.S. Geological Survey, a woman by the name of Sue Carl, and I for 25 years have been trying to fill in some of those holes in the geologic maps and get that information out there.
You and me were running around, and I remember you showing me about how the trees grow extra big over the cave networks, but I can't remember why what it was that you told me that.
Well, there's two in Southeast Alaska. There's two incredibly productive forest areas. One is a alluvial fan or a riparian riparian area down along a stream of gravels, well drained gravels, but nutrient rich. Mm-hmm. And the other one's on the carbonates, and so the fractures of the limestone are open down maybe 50 feet, little teeny hairline fractures, and the roots can get down into that, and they access the non-acidic waters then, because the limestone has buffered the rainwater and the organic water that's very acidic. So you have nutrient-rich water that's basic in a well-drained landscape, much like a gravel pile is well-drained, except fluctuates with rivers and streams. And so this is another type of productive landscape. And the other thing is most of our big trees, our big spruce and stuff like that in Southeast Alaska have a very shallow root system on top of glacial till. You've seen that. And when they fall over, you got a 30-foot diameter root mass that's like 18 inches deep.
That always blows my mind when you see that and they tip and you're like, what in the hell is it holding on to anyways? But it just peels away and then you look and there's just a rock sitting there. And it's got like a never-ending disc of shit that was a hand deep.
A hand deep. It's amazing.
And you wonder how it ever stood there anyways.
So in the limestone, it can get down in those fractures.
And grab on.
And it's holding on.
Yeah.
And so you'll see, instead of a root ball tip over frequently, you'll see it snapped off 40 feet up. When that sail in the top of the tree gets big enough that it can't take the wind pressure of our storms, it'll snap off instead of turning over the roots because it's still holding so tight. So a lot of the trees grew older and larger. So a lot of the original timber harvest in Southeast Alaska was focused on the limestone areas, which makes total sense.
It's the big trees.
I explored those areas, locating the caves and the rivers going underground, the streams going underground, and the vertical pits and that kind of thing. But then I also put together expeditions of folks who would come and explore those caves, and we had paleontologists and we basically started. When I got to Southeast Alaska, any published document that you read said we were a blanket of ice to the edge of the continental margin till 10,000 years ago and nothing lived there. And the first thing we did was find a cave full of bones that were 10, 11, 12,000 years old that started challenging that. We kept pushing that back. And so we changed that paradigm through time on when did the ice pull back and what was the environments like and who was living there and stuff like that.
What was the old-ass deer bone you found?
Hecata Island in a cave called Nautilus Cave, and what used to be a vertical pit coming into that cave that had filled with sediment. In a little alcove, I found 3, it was leg bones. And those were basically 9,200, 9,500 years old, somewhere in that vicinity right there.
Blacktail deer.
We now know they're blacktail deer. We didn't know what it was then because we'd actually found a bunch of caribou bones in the caves. So there were caribou on Prince of Wales Island until 10,500 years ago. But recently, working with Charlotte Lindquist and her students back in Buffalo, they did the paleogenetics, and it is a Sitka blacktail deer. It is a blacktail deer. So the first deer to show up, so we have 3 bones. We have one out of that cave, one out of Xena Cave that's 7,800 years old, and a bone out of a shell midden left by natives at a campsite. Their waist, basically, there was a deer leg bone in there that turned out, it was a bone that had been identified as a caribou bone, but when we did the genetics, it came out as a blacktail bone. Those 3 blacktail are definitely Sitka blacktail, but they contain a little bit of mule deer mitochondrial DNA.
Which would be different than now.
Yeah, and so then we have hundreds and hundreds of deer bones in caves.
Can you talk about how those bones get caught in the caves? I mean, you may have the opportunity to go look. Just for people listening, when we were filming our show Hunting History, we spent a day with Jim in caves. So Jim was able to show me how they function, but can you tell people how the caves trap shit?
And also, just it'll come out in your thought process, I'm sure, but like when you find a bone in a cave versus like the shell midden bone, there's probably some conclusions that you jump to from one or the other.
When you find a bone in a cave, you absolutely don't know how old it is. They usually turn slightly brown from the tannins and the organic waters of Southeast. You've seen that many times around your place there.
Mm-hmm.
But the bone itself, a 20,000-year-old bone will look like a 100-year-old bone. You cannot tell by picking up the bone and just looking at it. And mostly what happens is either a predator was in a dry portion of a cave and brought part of its meal in.
Okay.
And a lot of times we have bones in one particular cave that had so many bones. It was Arctic fox bringing bones in from a large predator and depositing in the caves, or they're a vertical trap. So remember as we came around from the flooded sinkhole, there was that vertical pit right off of the trail.
That scared the shit out of me. I mean, we were safe looking at it, but I was like, man, I didn't know there's shit like that around here.
And we were on that boardwalk. Remember looking down that hole? So that was a hole that was roughly the size of this room, that the entrance was about 3 feet across, and that was an organic mat. So if we would walk on that, you'd go right through. Well, that's what the deer do.
Would never know how. On some of that stuff, you would never, if you were just out dicking around, you would 100% walk down in there and just
gone.
How many dudes must be laying in those holes?
We've actually had a few vertical pits that have a little pile of bones, deer and bear and stuff, right where they, one I can think of is 150 feet deep. We called Bear's Plunge because the entrance is about the size of this table, but at the bottom it's 100 feet in diameter and it just bells out. So when you rappel into that, you're like a spider coming down off of a web. And here was this mound of bones at the bottom that had accumulated over several thousand years.
What all was in that pile?
That was mainly black bear and deer. but there was a few small rodents and stuff like that.
No people.
No people in that. So, yeah, it's so either a vertical trap or somebody brings it into the cave.
Mm-hmm.
They can wash into the cave. Dang it. But it's really hard to, the bones usually then get washed on through the cave if they get into a stream course or something like that.
I want to jump out of this a little bit to get to something different. After you retired from geology after 30 years, right?
Yes.
And then instead of just kicking it and hunting with your muzzleloader and everything, you got involved on a volunteer basis with Mule Deer Foundation?
I'm actually a contractor for the Mule Deer Foundation.
Oh, okay.
But there's also some I am kind of going out and getting other things, and so I'm not always working for him, but I'm still working for him.
Yep, got it. And in particular, you became like particularly focused on blacktail deer.
So Miles Meridi was the CEO for years.
Yep.
And working, and I had started going down in 2006, and I manned a booth at the Hunt Expo in Salt Lake City about Sitka blacktail on the Tongass National Forest, which is kind of funny. I was the geologist representing the Tongass National Forest talking about Sitka blacktail deer. They weren't sending biologists down there. I went down. And so I kept saying, like in your mission statement, it says mule deer and blacktail deer and their habitat. That's what your focus is on the conservation of that. And I said, what can we do for blacktail? And so I was pretty relentless with that for years and years and years. And then Joel took over as CEO 3-4 years ago now. And he goes, what are we doing for blacktail deer? And about that time, Steve Belinda, a good friend of mine, called and said, it's time to pony up. He knew I just retired. And I said, what's going on? And he goes, we want to start creating a focus on blacktail deer. And I said, I was really enjoying retirement. Mm-hmm. And I said, but I'm in 100% because this is where we've always wanted to get to. And so we went to Leopold, and the Mule Deer Foundation put on a blacktail summit that all of the agencies and a lot of the forests sent people to, and it was held at Leopold's headquarters in April of 22. We really realized that the conservation of blacktail, it's pretty much the same issues from Northern California to Alaska as related to habitat and how man has changed the landscape through timber management. There's different challenges. There's different things, different predation schemes and stuff like that, but the challenges were the same. And so we started putting a much larger focus in that and trying to get more get chapters established. There was no Mule Deer Foundation chapters up there. And one of the biggest problems I had in Alaska was going into a community and sitting down with a group of people. And the first question was like, well, why does the Mule Deer Foundation want to help us with blacktail? So I'd spend most of my time talking about that and finally get around to substantive things that we could do on the landscape.
This episode is sponsored in part by BetterHelp. Now, let me tell you, over the years, I've noticed a lot of people who go down a dark path in life by falling into the habit of comparing their lives to other people's lives, often comparing their lives to what they imagine what other people's lives are like. It's destructive because comparison is the thief of joy. And it's easy to envy other people's lives. It might look like they have it all together on Instagram, but in reality, they probably don't. And therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have, so you can start living your own best life. If you're thinking about starting therapy, you should give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Stop comparing and start focusing with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/MeatEater today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/MeatEater. Well, let's back up to that question, though. why do people think of mule deer and like talk about the taxonomy of a blacktail? Right? I mean, it's like they're like not brothers but cousins. Mule deer cousins?
They're mule deer cousins. And so it was Emily Latch and Jim Heffelfinger, who we talked about, did a genetic paper that showed that starting about at the beginning of the last series of ice age, the Great Last Ice Age, just 2.5 million years ago, probably because of snow levels and glaciers in the Cascade coastal mountain range there of Washington, Oregon, Idaho, down to California, it separated whatever was a proto deer from what we now know as a mule deer. And in coastal refugia or coastal areas, blacktail developed separated from those mule deer. And
so they got separated by ice.
They got separated by ice and time. And they also was a slight divergence as you moved north through Oregon and Washington away from California. So if I remember that paper right, that the Californian blacktail are a little closer to mule deer and are distinguishable, but they're still Columbia blacktail.
Yeah.
So that's one of the separate subspecies. And then Sitka blacktail exists only from halfway up the British Columbia coast through Prince Rupert and then into the islands of southeast Alaska. And then they'd have been translocated in 1924 up to Kodiak and several places around southeast Alaska. And so there weren't any on Kodiak before.
But they're native to Prince William Sound, though.
No.
They're not native to Prince William Sound?
No, they were translocated to Prince William Sound. They were translocated to Yakutat. They were all the whole Prince William Sound area, and there were several other places they tried to plant Sitka blacktail that didn't take.
So what was the northernmost, if you go back, well, I don't know what the hell, 200 years, whatever, some time stamp, 200 years ago, what was the northernmost Sitka blacktail deer?
It was probably in the Juneau areas. So
I've been telling people the wrong thing.
Yeah. So Gustavus, the front range of Glacier Bay National Park, around maybe up towards Skagway and Haines, a little bit up in there. I'm not sure how far the historic range was. I know they were on Admiralty, Chichagof, and Baranof Islands and around
They
Juneau.
were there naturally.
Naturally around there.
Why do they look like, so why do they have such a vibe like they kind of got to look like a little white-tailed deer kind of?
Because they're badass. I love these deer.
No, but what is it like? Why are the Sitka blacktails look different? Why do they? Because you look at them and you look like they look like they got some kind of like white-tailed deer influence, but that's not true.
You're comparing them to a Columbian.
Yeah, they just like their antler configuration.
I think it's environmental. I think it was that tight coast range forest that they evolved in.
Mm-hmm.
And so overall body weights, they're not much different than Columbia and some of the other stuff. So like I did a study with Alaska Department of Fish and Game where I weighed stuff with the state over a 2-year period. And it was nothing to have a Sitka blacktail come in field dressed at 145 to 165. And there were a few big outliers. So, I mean, substantial deer. They're just a lot shorter and bulkier.
Oh, little squatty little suckers, man.
And their tail is not ropey at all. It is more white, V'd with a black top in that white. And they'll use it to flag, just like a whitetail will flag. Of course, it's not quite as dramatic because it's not as long. And I think they're the perfect rainforest animal because their antlers are probably more close in because of that vegetation and stuff they evolved in.
Yeah. So it's not because of white-tailed deer love making. It's just like it's convergent evolution.
Right.
Rather than diverge or whatever.
Yeah, there was a Val Geist years ago suggested that the blacktail were a function of mule deer and whitetail breeding or something like that.
Dude, yeah.
And that
you want me to tell you the whole idea that he had? It was that. Do you remember this?
You just offered this up, not me. I don't remember that. I don't remember.
It was that, like, there was some period in time he proposed this. So Yanni's a big Val Geist disciple because Yanni likes his shirker buck theory. Val Geist proposed this idea. He's still alive or he passed away recently?
He passed away.
Yeah. that whitetail deer have been down in like the southeast for millions of years, southeast U.S., and at some time climatic conditions were such that whitetail deer spread all the way across the continent. Okay, and then the middle dried out, and then you developed mule deer and whitetails. Then something happened, and all of a sudden these whitetails came back out, made love with these mule deer, and somehow, maybe I'm screwing it up, and that produced like a blacktail. It was elaborate.
Yeah.
It was elaborate.
You're not far off. I actually had beers with Val one time, and he described
broke it down for you?
and in later years, through genetic analysis, he said, yeah, I had that wrong.
Oh, he did?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know what his shirker buck theory is? Yanni will tell you.
No.
You don't know?
No.
I think he said he applied it to any cervid, but that a buck, there are certain bucks that he deemed as shirkers because they would shirk the responsibility of mating or rutting with the long-term goal that if they shirked for 3, 4, 5 years, that the year that they decided to enter in, their body mass and health and antlers would be so much bigger than any of the competition that they could then dominate the breeding period and thus spread their genes across the whole pool.
He's like, I'm going to lay low for a couple years, and when I come down, I'm coming down.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'm going to be bigger and badder than everybody.
Yeah, it'd be like if you never went to the bar and you just worked out and did skin
Didn't do any drinking.
No, you just did like skin treatments and worked out and worked on your hairstyle until you were
read a lot of books
and you were ready.
Yeah.
And then one night you go to the bar.
Just witty, and pumped.
And just lay waste.
No, he didn't share that with me.
Heffelfinger finds that
Shirkers.
theory. It's insulting to Heffelfinger.
I know it is. I could see Jim. Ask him how to pronounce coos or cows.
Oh, real quick on Heffelfinger, somebody in our camp was using a app to predict deer movement.
Sure.
And was saying that this app was so good that it could be within minutes. That when it said excellent time for movement, you just look at the watch and just start looking across the hillside, and here they come. I didn't see it proved to be so good. But I asked Heffelfinger, I said, because he was talking about these pages of information that he produces about myths around wildlife. I said, do you have anything about moon or lunar tables affecting deer movement? Do you have a page on that? And he goes, no, because that would be real short. It'd just be one word, no.
That's one of my favorites. I mean, I joke about the one that red squirrels bite nuts off big squirrels. Mm-hmm. But the moon thing is just never, you're never going to convince people otherwise. In fact, Mark Kenyon, you present all the evidence to Mark Kenyon. Like Mark Kenyon's, I don't know if he is now. Mark Kenyon traditionally was a big moon guy. And you present all the evidence to Kenyon. Radio collar data from deer that don't change their groove because the moon. Deer car collision data that doesn't show differences because the moon. Like on harvest data, like on and on and on and on. And then Kenyon, he one day says to me, well, if it affects it by a minute, science, like I'm paraphrasing, he's like, science might not be able to capture.
Or they capture, but they
that
say
minute. But to me, that minute matters a lot because it could be the last minute of daylight.
There's also the what question are you asking or solving for? Because Jim went on to say, he's like, now, if the moon's bright enough, deer may bed in a more open area or feed in a open area at night because there's increased light. He's like, but that's not the moon phase so much as it is a photovoltaic
bioluminescence, I think, is what he was saying.
It's like if it's brighter, they're more active. I'm like, well,
We
Now
should do
Jim's
a
muddying the whole damn water up.
We need to get back to Jim here, but we
Yeah.
should do a podcast, Corinne, on and bring in Mississippi Deer Lab. They just recently processed a bunch of collar data, speaking to, because so many people like these
can we do
moon
that?
believers were just continually emailing in and just being like, yeah, but you guys aren't asking the right questions. You guys aren't, you're looking at your data, but you're not aligning the red moon with the blue moon and the wind and the underfoot and the barometric pressure. And you need to look at that specific point. They're like, all right, why don't you guys all tell us? We'll do a big survey and tell us exactly what we should look for in our data. And then we'll do it and we'll look for it. And they did it. And of course, the conclusion is that it doesn't matter.
Can you guest produce this segment?
We should do a whole podcast.
No, I mean guest produce the whole episode.
Sure.
Okay.
I'll help Corinne with it. I don't think she wants me just to take over.
It'd be like an internship. You'd be interning at your old job.
All right, we'll call
it back in the saddle, and it'll be the Yanni episode. All right, back to blacktail deer.
Our blacktail deer,
blacktail
deer don't even know there's a moon.
That's awesome.
One last thought on the moon thing. For a while, what I thought was this. For a while, I thought when it's bright out, you see a bunch of deer because it's bright out. And maybe that's where it came from. Meaning when it's pitch black, you can't see shit. When it's moonlit, you're like, oh, look at that deer. Right? Like picture walking out when there's snow on the ground and a full moon, and you're walking out.
Mm-hmm.
You're also aware of all kinds of stuff you didn't know was going on.
Yeah. There's no such thing as end of shooting light.
All right. Back to blacktail deer. So, Columbia blacktail. Let me ask you this question about blacktail deer, because this is something we've mused about a fair bit. I've shot one Columbia blacktail deer in California. Dude, I mean, it looks like a mule deer. And I've often talked about, just when talking about the sort of arbitrary nature of certain classifications of wildlife, I've talked about how, according to the Boone and Crockett Club, if a deer is standing on the west side of I-5 in California, he's a blacktail. If he were to run across I-5, he's now a mule deer. But we have to be able to do a better job than that nowadays, right? Like what is a Columbia blacktail and what is a mule deer?
Actually, Boone and Crockett is offering genetic tests that you can send in your deer and get that answer.
To get the real answer.
And Jim and Emily Latch and Jim Heffelfinger came up with a percentile graph looking at deer samples that they had, and they cut it off at 0.9%. In other words, if it's over 10% mule deer, they're not calling it a Columbia blacktail.
So are they going to go in and start kicking all kinds of mule deer out of the Columbia blacktail record book?
No, because it depends on location. So the record book is a line that comes down. It doesn't always follow I-5. It takes off on one meridian and comes down through Medford, Oregon, and down in there.
But there has to be a bunch of mule deer in the there's got to be a bunch
top end.
Yeah, there's got to be some fakes. There's got to be people that have record book Columbia blacktails that they just shot a mule deer that happened to be on the wrong side of the road.
Yeah. And when I grew up in Washington, we used to purposely go up and we called them bench leg muleys. They were these, we would shoot them and they'd field dress at like 225 to 240. They were these beautiful blacktails, little teeny racks and stuff like that with huge bodies. And we went up into the Cascades and targeted them. But I mean, that's where we hunted, because they were much larger deer.
And you're saying that those were blacktails or they were mule deer?
They were cross.
Okay.
Some kind of a cross in there.
Got it. But then a Sitka blacktail is like much more distinct, right?
Sitka blacktail.
Because they don't have any exposure. Like Sitka blacktails don't bump up against any other kind of deer.
Yes, they do.
Oh, they do? Okay.
There's mule deer moving into Skagway.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1991, I took a photograph of a mule deer doe with a fawn inside of Alaska up by Hyder. And so there is the possibility of some contact. There's mule deer just outside of Prince Rupert. so they could come down the Skeena River in there and come out of the interior. So I think that's probably the first batch of deer that made it out to Prince of Wales Island. Probably had some kind of a contact like that, an interbreeding between mule deer and that isolated population that became sick of blacktail. That's why they identified mule deer in that genome when those 3 oldest bucks that we have. You got to realize we have a really small sample size, and the researchers say that it's we're basing this on just a handful of samples. But that all of the older ones were very distinct, that they had a little bit of mule deer in them.
So is it fair, like, I know we were talking about Val Geist's theory, his sort of like pre-genetics theory, but is it right that at a time you just had these little pockets of deer that were bound in by glaciers and they survived along the Pacific coast?
That's what the idea is. That was kind of what they refer to kind of like a chain of pearls of habitat that wasn't overridden by ice. That if it wasn't so severe, if the winter's so severe that they could have existed there. You got to realize too, we had much lower sea levels. Our sea levels were 400 feet less than they are today. So there was a lot of land between 17,000 and about 13,000 that was exposed on the shelf out there. So so we have land ice interactions with the weight of the ice pushing down on the land and the land rebounding back up. And so there was some of that stuff going on, and that's
which means though that these deer could have existed in a landscape that we basically can't see at all. Like it could have changed dramatically, and they could have evolved to be like their high alpine tundra environment could be closer to what they evolved in, as in flat, brushy in areas versus any of the stuff that we hunt them on in the slopes, like the rocky, mossy, dark timber terrain.
Absolutely. In fact, it looks like according to I've did a lot of coring with palynologists and lakes and looking at also at the speleothems in the caves, hold a record of climate, that somewhere at about 11 to 10,000 years ago, a very dry spruce and hemlock forest started to appear on the landscape, replacing a herb-dominated tundra that had willows and alders around stream courses and stuff and in disturbance areas. And you start seeing that, and that fires were on the landscape in southeast Alaska till about 7,800 years ago. And then then you start seeing cedar and skunk cabbage and sphagnum and stuff dominate the pollen record, and the wetter climate plants start showing up. So the rainforest that we all know and love today and hunt in up there is only maybe about 6,000 years old. So it's relatively young. Those great big red cedars are by your place there. They may be the 10th generation on the landscape kind of a thing when you think about that. So it's been a really dynamic vegetation change over a relatively short period of geologic time. And the topography, those humps that we fish halibut off the coast on were alpine ridgetops when the sea level was lower. I love that stuff.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So what does that mean, like the overall picture of black-tailed deer conservation, right? So just as an example, this would be months ago, right? We talked about Arizona offering moose lottery draws to hunt moose. And part of their reasoning is like moose they're a remnant of a remnant population in Arizona. They're here right now, but long term they're not going to be here, more than likely. Is one of the arguments. In regards to black-tailed deer, when they're in such a geologically speaking, like a very rapidly changing ecosystem, are they adapting well to that ecosystem? Is there anything that says there were a hell of a lot more blacktail when a different environment was more prolific? Kind of where are we at?
The biggest thing that controls Sitka blacktail populations not that predation doesn't, but it's bad winters. A bad winter can do more to wipe out a population. 2006 and 7 on Admiralty Island and up by Hoona, we lost like 85 or 90% of the deer. I was working with Dr. Sophie Gilbert on her PhD, and we had a bad winter on Prince of Wales Island in 2011. At Control Lake Junction, right there where you split to either go to Thorn Bay or go north, there was 5 feet of snow May 1st. It was horrible. I followed those fawns that year. She went into the winter with 50 fawns on the collar. We came out with 3.
Whoa.
So we basically lost a whole cohort of age class because of that bad winter. So I think about the Little Ice Age. The Little Ice Age ended, 300 years ago? There might not have been as many deer on the landscape. There's maybe more deer now than there was 300 years ago. And what was the winters like coming out of glaciation, and as glaciers were more prominent and stuff, even though we were in a wetter climate from 6,000 to the present, those first 5,000 years, the Sitka blacktail may not have been prolific on the landscape as they are today. So, and I think that timber management, when it was super active and there was still a lot of good habitat left, was creating all that forage. Of course, that forage wasn't available in a bad winter when those clear cuts get buried. So, I have seen in just the 30 some odd years I've been on Prince of Wales, I believe the population of Sitka blacktail on Prince of Wales Island is half of what it was when I got there in 1990.
Whoa.
And that's not a result of predation, in my opinion. It's a result of now all those older clear cuts have grown up and there's no forage. It's what we call stem exclusion, that there's no light gets to the forest floor. It grows mosses and lichens and mushrooms.
That was going to be a question of mine. Earlier you mentioned, timber management. Is it good for blacktails?
As long as you maintain what they need to survive in a bad winter. They need to, so they're an animal of the edge, like all deer. And they bed on their little knobs and stuff like that. And when it starts getting snowy and stuff, they need to be able to access food. So they might be even on a steep slope with a modest forest on there. You still got a lot of canopy interception because of the angle and the way the trees interlock. And they're getting around fine. When the snow depth gets higher than their brisket, so basically on a Sitka blacktail that's higher than about 18 inches, they need to be able to get to some place to eat. So you have to have corridors for them to move either laterally or vertically, and you have to have something for them to go to that's got thermal cover and food. So the mosaic that's been created by past forests, the challenge is going into that habitat and where should we be doing improvements and stuff like that. And that's what we're hoping to focus on is where should we put those improvements on the landscape to do the biggest bang for the buck, as it was? I haven't thought about that.
Go ahead.
For the deer. So
can you walk through what, just as part of a broader conversation about timber management and harvest, can you walk through the sort of lifespan of a clear cut? Only in terms of deer, because
deer forage.
I've watched them where they're fresh, nothing's really going on. A couple years into it, they start getting loaded up with deer, and I've been fortunate now to see one get to the point where there's nothing living in it.
Yeah.
So lay out like what it does as it grows, because a lot of guys think the answer to more deer is more clear cuts. And where does that get complicated?
The food that's produced is incredible. The amount of forage that's in those clear cuts at about year 3,
Okay,
3 and 4 and 5 is crazy nuts. Like the blueberry. So the primary thing that the deer eats are the vaccinium. So your huckleberries and your blueberries, and especially the red huckleberry. They love the red huckleberry. And some
they're eating the leaves and
and twigs
buds,
and stuff right at the very end of the new growth. And you've seen that stuff in the clear cuts up there where it's browsed back to where it's a brush you can hardly push your legs through. So you start out, we don't have any of that for about 2 years.
Okay.
And then that finally starts really taking over. And then so you got from year 3 to about year 10 or 12, it's doing pretty good. And now your trees are getting up to the point that they're starting to shade out more patches and stuff. But there's still a lot of forage in between.
Mm-hmm.
That continues to close in. So the bigger the trees are, the less forage there is in that vegetation. So you start getting maybe a little more salmonberry and stuff in there, and depends on the site. It depends on how much alder's in there. There's a lot of variables, but we'll kind of do generalities. The Forest Service historically has gone into the stands. So I'd say by year 15, it's starting to get pretty closed in. You're starting to lose your forage. But of course, a clear cut is not ubiquitous. Some of it regenerates really well and some of it regenerates more poorly. So there's places to eat out in there. Then the Forest Service goes in, excuse me.
No, take time.
Somewhere between year 16 and year 20 and pre-commercially thins. So there's so many stems per acre come back under natural regeneration that they need to drop that down to a certain spacing because of over competition by the trees that are growing back.
Mm-hmm.
And you've seen this. They go in and they fall those trees and your slash load is enormous. It can be 10, 12 feet deep. It releases sunlight, gets to that, and the vegetation responds, but the deer can't access that under that slash.
And if you're wondering, listener, neither can a hunter. It's not fun to walk through.
You can't go through that with a D8 cat.
Oh, brutal.
It is amazing stuff. And besides the fact, because that was commercially thinned, you've got all of the, usually about 12 to 24 inches high, the bases of the trees that they cut, like punji sticks sticking up through that stuff. So you fall through that. If you're up walking on that mess and you fall down, you got to watch where you land. Anyhow, but deer don't access that. The Forest Service has identified certain trails and left unthinned strips through some clear cuts to allow for deer movement vertically, in which they use sometimes. If they were well-placed spots, the deer continue to use. If they were using them in the original clear cut, they use them post-commercial thinning.
Mm-hmm.
Then 30 years in, that's growing back shut again. And then that continues to get less and less and less light to the forest floor. That slash starts to rot and break down. And you've got all of then it's usually like maybe 18 inches thick with just the boles of the trees that were originally fell in there that might still, but then they won't support your weight, but they're up in there. But by that time, there's no forage until that stand gets up 100 years old or something like that, and starts to naturally select, and wind starts punching holes through it, and you start to get some light filtering down in. Around the sides, you get light coming in, maybe that's doing pretty good. But there's at least a period there of, between 30 and 100 to 150 years that there's just not a lot of forage for deer in that piece, unless it's managed, unless you go in and open that up.
God, that doesn't speak well for the deer hunting around my little spot.
No.
So I got an 80, 90 year dry spell coming up.
Actually, what I did years ago is I saw this coming. I mean, it was the wave of green that was going to be there, and I stopped hunting any managed areas, and I started moving out into the unharvested areas and learning how to hunt that.
Yep.
Because I knew this was coming. I mean, it was, and so what's happened?
You wanted to step outside of the clear cut system,
right? And good Lord, I have killed hundreds of deer in harvested areas. When they're productive and it's crazy, we used to go into clear cuts in the early 90s and you'd blow on a deer call and 40 deer would stand up. It was totally different than you have today. And you virtually went out and selected what size of buck you wanted, kind of a thing. It was a totally different thing. Yeah, alpine areas you were talking about, when we were first doing that in the 80s or 90s, it was nothing to crawl up onto a ledge and stop and glass 60 deer. And like half of those would be bucks.
Wow.
It was an amazing.
With so much of the island that hasn't been logged, or just not even that island that you happen to live on, but all through Blacktail deer range. Okay.
Yep.
A lot of it hasn't been logged.
Oh,
you
no.
got big wilderness areas. So why are Blacktail numbers down?
No, they're down in Unit 2. They're down where you and I both have explored.
And you think that is because all those old clear cuts have entered the shitty period?
That's right. But Unit 4, so Admiralty, Chichagof, Baranof Island, they're doing really good. They haven't had a bad winter since 2011. The deer population is going nuts, and they're starting to get age class on bucks. I'm seeing 4 points being shot out of Sitka, which I never saw before. So they're doing good. Unit 3, which is QU, Mitkoff, and Kupernoff Island, 1972 was a killing winter. There was 6 feet of snow on the beach June 1st in 1972. They stopped the hunts in Unit 3 for years and years and years, decades, and started it back up for a 1 week and then a 2-week period where you were allowed to take 1 buck. Those deer now are really rebounding. And there's a camera trap thing going on right now out of Petersburg and Wrangell, maybe Wrangell, that's being conducted by the state. And the deer numbers are really up in Unit 3. Ketchikan is responding, and all of that area around Ketchikan is responding really well with deer numbers. So the only place that the deer numbers are down really is Unit 2 on Prince of Wales Island. And that's not ubiquitous as you move south. So if you get down south of Craig and you move down island and stuff in some of those remoter areas, that's warmer and they have less effects of snow down there and stuff. And so there's areas that are doing a little bit better. Then there's pockets up in I kind of hunt mainly the north into Prince of Wales and central to north. Actually, I hunt a lot in central. And there's pockets in there that have higher deer numbers. And so it's not all been cut, and it's not all gloom and doom, but it's definitely different. Just in my experiential time being on the island, it's definitely different. And it has been partially due to the state of Alaska having to walk a very fine line there for a number of years, why the wolf was being suggested to be listed and limiting the amount of trapping that could go on for wolves. But the bottom line is, I believe that we all agree here that if you have great habitat and your habitat's functioning really well, it can take the pressure of predation. And right now we have a compromised habitat because of past management well, not so much as past management, it's just right now we have not transitioned at all to a second growth harvest economy on the forest.
Tell me what that means.
We are, and we're not cutting second growth. We're not going into those stands, commercially thinning those stands or doing patchwork of small clear cuts, or we're just not cutting those trees yet. Some of them are ready to harvest now. There's rules on how you can harvest, but most of it's going to reach critical mass in like 2030 and 2033, that there's going to be a bunch of stuff that could be ready to harvest. The problem is there's not the infrastructure to do manufacture of the wood on the island right now. The one large mill that's there really doesn't want to do anything with second growth. He's tooled for old growth. And you have to have different saws and different processes and stuff like that to be Karen, my wife, works on biomass. There's only one place doing biobricks on the island. You could be taking all of the slash and the non-merchantable trees and grinding that up and making biofuels out of it, biobrick, biopucks, some kind of log or something like that, or wood pellets. That that infrastructure is not in place, so the only market is to export to Asia.
For the little shit.
For this young growth that could be harvested. And there's been a couple of young growth sales, but mostly it all was exported to Asia.
What's the situation, like, go way down to California? What's the landscape look like right now? I mean, like where do blacktail deer stand down there?
I am by far no expert in the Columbia blacktail in Washington, Oregon, and California. I will tell you from what we learned from that summit in Oregon, and I won't do California because I don't have enough knowledge, but what I picked up from the wonderful folks at Oregon Department of Fish and Game, and they took us out on field trips, is a lot of that is a checkerboard of ownership in Southern Oregon, Central Oregon, and stuff within the blacktail home range. And so you have timber industry blocks next to state blocks or BLM blocks. And if they want to do a habitat enhancement project or something on those, the block next to it is being intensely managed to produce second growth wood for lumber. And so the challenges are in the land ownership makeup with the Pacific Northwest. And I'm going to venture to guess that slops over into Northern California.
Like, it makes it hard to have a cohesive plan.
It also makes it hard when they're trying to get, of course, I guess this is across everything, is how do you do population estimates of a rainforest deer? You can't fly over. They don't have winter ranges where they congregate and stuff like that. So doing population estimates on the landscape. Down in Oregon, they were using deer pellet DNA and dogs to locate the piles of turds out in the clear cuts. And so they had a contractor out there picking up samples using a dog to find where the deer had pooped while it was feeding out there, and then doing a population estimate. In Southeast Alaska, Todd Brinkman developed this. He's a professor at University at Fairbanks up there, University of Alaska. And he developed a way of doing DNA. So he did transects. He did 1,200 meters, 1 meter either side. He went and removed all poop from that. And then he started running that transect and picking up fresh pellets. And from that, you can get individuals and sex off of that. And after you do that time and time and time again through seasons, you can start to get an idea of how many deer are on the landscape, what the demography is, how many males per female, 100 females and stuff like that. And that's the only way we've been able to do population estimates. They're trying some right now. The one I was talking about, I think it's at Petersburg. They're trying to use both deer pellet transects and trail cameras to see if they can come up with a population estimate on the landscape. So it's really hard to estimate just how many deer are out there.
What might be blacktails per square mile in Southeast Alaska?
I've heard things of 12 to 20. And that's
more than I would have figured, man.
I was going to say that seems positive.
Because holy shit, can you go a long time and not see one?
They're sneaky little guys.
Yeah.
I that, and the 20 might be winter range where they get a little more compressed.
Yeah.
And stuff. So, there's definitely areas that it's not 12 to 20.
Oh, yeah. Like those areas where within 100 yards, you're crawling as flat as you can on your belly to get under a tree. And then you're also 15 feet above other trees that are tipped over. Those areas might be a little hard for deer to travel.
It's hard for us to travel.
Yeah.
It is probably the most challenging landscape that I have ever traveled. I have a particular place that I like to hunt that's super hard to get to. And when you get off on the beach, to gain 1,200 feet in elevation, 1.25 miles from the beach, I've never done it in under 6 hours.
Oh, oh, that's misery. What's optimal? Is there an optimal considering just like the huge variance of
optimal
habitat density?
I think you're probably in that 12 to 15 range, something like that. But when you get into, even yet today, when you get into really good alpine habitat, you may have 25 deer per square mile, but that's just a seasonal thing.
Yeah.
And then they, as the snow comes and fills that up, they start moving down that slope. They get into those Krumholtz trees where you can never find them, just below the beautiful vegetation in the alpine. And so I've got a theory that every piece of alpine across the landscape, every piece of subalpine, because alpine is kind of defined. That's those true highest peaks, but all those little muskeg ridges have the highest point on that ridge. That's got the best forbs and stuff that's around, and I think that the best buck of those watersheds goes to the best forage every year, and that's where you're going to find them. That every ridge has that spot.
The best buck is on the best spot.
Just like the best bear goes to the best fishing hole. That best buck knows where that best stuff is. And that's the theory that I apply. And in fact, I'm not hunting traditional alpine much anymore. I'm kind of hunting those lower ridges and stuff and finding those little pockets that's going to hold 2 or 3 really good crackerjack bucks.
I want to get back to conservation work, but real quick.
Okay.
What percentage of the bucks you killed do you call in, and what percent do you creep up on?
50-50.
And how are you creeping up on them? Just creeping?
Alpine mostly.
Yeah.
Or dumb luck.
No, I'm talking those low nasty muskeg ridges. How do you hunt them?
Hike up, put a tent up, because if it's nice weather, because we're not generally up there when it's really lousy weather, by 7 o'clock in the morning, those deer are in the timber. You've got between 4:30 in the morning and 7 o'clock in the morning. That's your window to get success. If you're not there, it's not going to. If you're starting out at the truck at 4:30, you're not going to be there at 7. You got to be there when they get up
at 4:30.
So they're already out feeding.
Yep. Oh.
And what I usually find them, they're either bedded right on the edge of the timber, kind of chewing their cud and thinking about the great night they had out there foraging on those forbs, and they're just taking those last few things before the sun gets too warm, and then they drift back into the timber. And so I usually hunt those edges at bedding areas that I know around those upper level muskeg, like 23 to 2,600 foot elevation ridges.
Mm-hmm.
Do you get an evening period of movement as well?
If you have an overcast day, yes.
Full moon.
No, yeah, the full moon, which we never see. No, because I go up with my tent and I stay there and I glass and I don't see anything before I go to bed.
Interesting.
And bed then at those times. So our season opens up the 24th of July. So from the 24th of July through August up there, I'm up in those things. And hell, it's light till 11:30 or something like that. And
I'm not seeing those deer.
And I'm not seeing those deer. And I wake up in the morning and they'll be in the meadows.
Interesting, because knowing that most of these deer get up every 4 to 6 hours, right?
Yep.
To do some sort of feeding, moving around. They must be then doing that down in the timber where you just can't see them.
Yep. Yeah, I always take something good to read because you're going to have long days up there when you're just not going to have. There's some places I've found patches of snow and stuff like that where they'll go out and dig holes and they'll bed in the patches of snow if you got a snow that persists. But the last few years, since 2011, we haven't had snow in those. So it just hasn't been there.
Earlier you talked about starting the Blacktail Deer Foundation, right? That's what it's called?
Yeah, so we actually hadn't got to that.
Well, no.
We were going towards that.
Is that what we'll get to it?
Yep.
But you'd mentioned it. And you'd said that the Mule Deer Foundation had looked for a long time and they hadn't been doing blacktail deer conservation work. If I had to take a guess, like a stab at why, I would picture that if you came to me and said, what can we do to improve mule deer habitat and mule deer numbers, I feel like you'd really quickly generate a list of projects. Meaning, well, this place, we have a huge amount of highway deer collisions. This place, they like to move from this mountain range down into this sage flat, but there's a bunch of fences and developments that are impeding the movement, so we can do some micro work to help the deer in that area. Or in this little basin, some well-timed predator control would help in May when they're dropping fawns, right? And you can kind of go and do these little distinct projects that improve mule deer in these funnel points or these focal areas of activity. But then you go and you look at this just seemingly never-ending sea of timber that's very hard to access, very hard to tell what's going on. And someone says, well, generate me like a chore list for how to help blacktails. I feel like it'd be like, I'll pray for weather. Do you know what I mean? Like, where would you even put money if you had it? Right? That would be my explanation of why no one's doing anything on blacktails. Because like, where do you begin?
I think that there was a lot of truth to that. I think you'd hit the nail on the head. And, and you've got to look at, it is absolutely quality of habitat driven. If there is a lot of places out there, we don't need to do anything. Mm-hmm. The habitat is just fine. But because of past timber management, and in Washington, Oregon, land ownership changes and stuff, but I'm thinking I'm very Southeast Pacific. We have native lands, where a lot of timber harvest on native lands, and Forest Service lands with a lot of harvest on there, and all of that has grown back into a dense forest with no forage under it. I think we have unlimited opportunity, but where to do it on that? So you have this great canvas, like a painter stepping up to a blank canvas. You want to pick the best place to do that habitat work that's going to get the best return to those deer. So anything you do in opening it up and creating forage, deer are probably going to find it and use it. But there's better places on the landscape to do it. And right now we're in the process of looking at that whole thing called Southeast Alaska past timber harvest of X age, and where should we focus? The Tongass National Forest is going through a forest plan revision, and we're looking at where should we focus our efforts. If we only have a small amount of money coming in and we only are going to be able to do so much per year, where should we go first and why?
Okay.
And so those are the challenges that we're looking at, right? There's a contract existing out there right now where we've got, it's a GIS biology exercise to take a look at that landscape, taking in LIDAR, taking in slope aspect, conductivity with existing habitats that's out there, planned projects, where are roads, where can we access? Now, one of the things that at least the Blacktail Deer Foundation has looked at too is if we do a treatment out there, if we create forage for deer and deer get back on the landscape, are those deer going to be accessible for hunters? Are they going to be proximal to a road, or can they walk in easily into that? If you're going to put deer on the landscape, it'd be nice to know that would also create additional opportunity to put meat in your freezer. The people on the island that I live, Prince of Wales, they rely on deer in their freezer. And this is the first time in the last couple of years I'm hearing people that haven't been finding the deer they normally would have to put meat in their freezers. So this is serious stuff, especially as prices go up.
So what would be a thing you would do if you identify? Is this part of the project you're working on where you're running all those cameras?
No. The camera thing started out with Sophie Gilbert and I had an idea. So the Forest Service would go in the past and they would log most of a drainage, but they would leave where you'd have a huge bunch of creeks coming down and alluvial fans. They would leave those as a leaf strip in between clear cuts. Then they come back and they fell, they did the pre-commercial thinning and created the slash that was 10, 12 feet deep. And so the only vertical movement that could go on was in those leaf strips in between the clear cuts. So the deer were squeezed into narrow slots.
Okay.
So we had control areas, and so we had 20 control area cameras and 20 leaf strip cameras. And we started that, and then they went in and they wanted to harvest in there, so we had to move. So I moved over to where I'm at now. And so at that time, Dr. Sophie Gilbert was working for the University of Idaho in conjunction with Todd Brinkman up at Fairbanks at the University of Alaska. And we were trying to look at deer movement. And I had an idea and a concept in my brain. My working thesis was, as it greened up in the spring, the deer were down in the lower elevations, and they slowly moved up as it greened up, and they finally got up to the alpine when the forbs came out, and they foraged up there. And then as it started to snow, they moved back down in the landscape. And I started monitoring these cameras 2018. So I've got 26 cameras out there right now. That's anything but the truth. The does and fawns above the lower elevation valley floor bed 500 to 800 feet above the valley floor, and they come down to feed daily in the dark, usually, almost always nocturnally, and not always for the does, and they move back up as the sun comes up in the morning. I do see the bucks in velvet as they're developing antlers will be milling around down feeding in the bottom, and then they go up, which I'm assuming they go up into that better forage up in the higher elevation, because I don't see them for a long time until rut. So I didn't know there was a daily vertical movement of deer on the landscape.
They're climbing 800 feet every time they want to eat.
Yes, sir. And you could almost set your clock by it. They're so nocturnally driven. And then as it comes into October, about on where I have my cameras, this changes. So as you move north in the Tongass, Petersburg and Wrangell, they rut 12, 14 days before Prince of Wales. So that the more higher latitude, little colder stuff run a little bit sooner, probably moon phase. Anyhow, all of a sudden, you start seeing much more forked horns and spikes. And they're starting to move vertically daily. As soon as it's dark, 10 minutes after dark, they're coming down. 10 minutes before daylight, they're going back up. And that
down into what? The bottoms, where all the lakes and ponds are and stuff. Yeah.
The females are feeding down in the not completely in the valley floor, but in the lower elevations of the valley. And those bucks are coming down. They don't know why they're doing it. They're too young to probably do much of the breeding. I also have found Sitka blacktail do not make scrapes, but they have marking trees. They have overhanging hemlock branches that they mouth, and they push their preorbital gland in there and their secretions between their antlers, and they urinate under those things. And I have 12 or 14 bucks coming to the same marking tree just day after day after day. And that progresses until about the 25th or 6th of October, and then the big bucks start showing up. Bigger bucks start showing up. The more older age class bucks come up, and they start showing up down in there. There's a frenzy between about October 25th and about the 6th or 7th of November, waiting for that first doe to come into estrus. And I'll have bucks all over the cameras. I mean, and they start showing up in the day. And I mean, it's just a progression and I've got this all plotted up because I'm really anal and weird about this stuff. And boom, the big bucks disappear. Nobody comes to the marking trees anymore. So the first does have come into heat, and they're on them. And that persists until about the 17th or 18th of November. And then bucks start coming back and marking that thing again. And then magic happens.
What's that?
These bucks that you have never seen, these oh my God bucks, show up about the 17th or 18th of November, and they persist on the landscape till about the 25th or 26th, maybe through Thanksgiving. And then they disappear. They vanish. And you hardly see any of those other bucks that's the guy that has been pumping iron for 4 years and shows up. But it's just like, whoa, where have you been?
Okay, walk me through all that. No, I like it, but walk me through all of it. So you're saying that
There's about 3 days of the year that you should be in the woods.
They're running all around. Okay, you got does on your cameras. Then all of a sudden you start seeing bucks showing up because the rut's coming.
Yep.
Then you see all this buck movement.
And the first bucks that show up are the spikes and the forkadorns.
Yep. Then you see a bunch of buck movement.
Then you see the next age class.
Okay.
You see the 2 to 4 year old.
Their
bucks.
timing is a little better.
Yeah. They're closer to estrus. They're not putting that much energy into chasing because they pretty much know when the first doe is going to come into heat because of the moon phase.
Mm-hmm.
That we never see.
Yep.
And then bang, they disappear and they're locked down.
That means they're on a doe.
They're actively on a doe until she's receptive.
See, that's when I must be always hunting.
Lockdown.
Yeah. At that moment, so that's the key thing for me. At that moment, her head is not switched from save the fawn, if you're doing a fawn bleat call. He wants to chase her, and you call her in, and he's going to come in behind her because he thinks she's just running away from him. Or you will have bucks coming to the call. There's no doubt about that. But at that moment, that just before the estrus.
And what date are you in now?
The 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th of November.
Okay.
These are days I'm never not in the woods. And you got to realize this is Jim Baichtal's belief system.
Understood. Well, you're here.
But
you're here for a reason.
I'm telling you, there are certain days that you're there because magic can happen.
Sorry, Jim, really quick. Can you get closer to the microphone, please? Thank you.
All right, then tell me the next thing that happens. Now, explain to me what happens when all of a sudden all these big bucks are running around again for 3 days.
So you have really good 2 to 4 year old bucks do the initial breeding. And I think there's up at the higher elevation, there's also a population of deer that don't come down.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the really big, huge, dominant 4 year old and better bucks are up there taking care of that. And as soon as they've taken care of everything on the rest of the landscape, they come down to see what was not taken care of at the lower elevations. And that tends to be the 17th, 18th, 19th of November through Thanksgiving.
And you're in the woods.
Man. And I don't hardly ever kill anything because I am absolutely locked into. I know that the possibility of me, and they actually become less nocturnal and a little more reliable. That they're going to be out sometime during the day.
Okay, I like it.
I have this tattooed on my arm. No, no, but that transition time between estrus, no estrus, and right in there, that shifts seasonally. It might be slightly earlier. It might be 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th of November, or it might be 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th of November. I think I've killed more deer on the 11th of November than any other day.
Okay. Now get back to how you'd fix the black-tailed deer problem. But for real, when you got huge thousands of square miles, you know what I mean? Like, what are you going to do, really?
So just roughly on Prince of Wales, a ballpark, I think just on the Forest Service, there's like 360,000 acres of young growth that's at or approaching stem exclusion phase. If you do the math with 12 to 20 deer per square mile, that's somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000 deer that ain't there. Pretty simple math.
It won't be for 80 years.
Or, yeah, until something is done with that second growth. And so we need, this is my perfect world, we need a active young growth management industry, and that industry has to be good enough. There's going to be some clear cuts made, and they're going to go in and do some industrial, larger scale logging and stuff. But we will have identified where where the stands are that should be approached to a habitat point of view, and make the decisions why those are important for habitat. And those won't be intensely managed by clear cutting and stuff like that. We'll go in and do commercial thinning of those stands, opening that stand up and getting daylight down in there. And there would be an industry that would locally manufacture that stuff, and the biomass would be used that comes off of it.
How in the hell are you going to create, like, if it's rare when you say, like, for the conservation of a species and proliferation of a species, we need to develop a timber industry. I mean, how do you
incentivize an industry, and what specific, like, is it the heating fuel, wood pellet, Camp Chef Traeger industry, right? Like, what is the market for that growth that is currently, like, being ignored, waiting for maturation or further maturation?
Oh, Cal, I got to share something with you. There's two things that have thwarted Dirt's dad that he cannot make himself.
Uh-huh.
Well, he can make anything himself. Making his own dip.
Earwax.
Growing his own dip, making his own dip, and then making his own pellet grill pellets.
There it is.
So there's your opportunity.
He just can't figure it out. It's killing him.
We actually, because my wife works in biomass and I love it, we heat all of our house with wood pellets.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm shipping them up from Idaho.
I thought you were heating with all that red alder.
I do the red alder firewood stuff. So we also have a wood stove. And so I cut red alder. In fact, I'll probably be cutting it if I can get out in the woods when I get back from this.
Okay. But you got a pellet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have a timber industry that's an old growth timber industry, and that industry needs to shift and we have several small mills that are actively milling and kiln drying lumber, and you can buy second growth lumber on Prince of Wales Island. They just can't take the volume that would be needed to make a difference in deer's lives.
And the free market economy is not going to take care of this.
I personally think if the management strategy shifted from the old growth strategy that it currently is on federal lands to a restoration economy based on, we're going to do better for the deer and water and streams and stuff like that, but we're going to also support some large-scale timber management, and this is what we're going to be putting up. We're not going to be doing old growth anymore. We're going to be cutting second growth.
Mm-hmm.
That would allow people to know that there was a supply of second growth there that would be coming. And then they could look for the capital to incentivize developing the plants to handle that. And that would be both biomass and wood. I mean, you go to Home Depot, you're not buying old growth Doug fir 2x4s. Those are all second growth. And that's what we have. We're still on the initial harvest of trees in Southeast Alaska, and we haven't transitioned over to young growth.
Got it. But that initial harvest is winding down, man.
It is winding down. And
do you think they ought to quit altogether?
I hope not. I hope not.
Logging old growth?
I hope not, because there's a lot of specialty mills that they don't need very much wood a year to produce an incredible product.
Okay.
So, small old growth timber sales, I hope they continue, and I think sustainably they could. But on large scale timber management, that could be steered very focused towards improving deer habitat. We need to change to a young growth industry.
And they can do all that young growth on old infrastructure.
Yes.
Because they've already got the roads.
Are there. But see, so very selfishly, I don't want to take any habitat earmarked dollars and rebuild roads and bridges and log transfer sites at saltwater and stuff like that. I would like to see a viable timber industry that keep those roads and bridges and stuff in good working order that we can benefit from for deer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think they need to be there together.
Is any of the stuff we're seeing, with the incoming administration and like the tariff wars and all this stuff that we might be starting in on, is any of that going to have a positive or negative impact on getting the industry you want established, or does this stuff play out too slowly?
I think it's going to play out too slowly, and I actually don't know what's going to come out of this, because the agencies and funding and people and all that is in flux right now, and we got to kind of let the dust settle here for a few months to find out where we're at before we can pick back up.
Yeah, but some well-placed tariff isn't going to all of a sudden spur the industry in the next few years.
I don't know. I don't know what those answers are. I know what I'd like to do on the ground if I was king.
Okay. Yeah, tell me.
What I would do. I mean, that's habitat work, focused habitat work in the right places. There was a bunch of folks that have put a lot of thought into why we want to improve that place for deer.
Mm-hmm.
And what would we do there?
Do you feel that you're going to be able to start doing this? Like, what does it take to start doing the work?
We actually have right now. We don't know. The Blacktail Deer Foundation and Mule Deer Foundation does not know the status of the funding dollars that we had agreements in place for right now, because of the changes that's happened in the last couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to let that settle, and the people that we were working with inside the agencies. We hope that we are solid in the agreements that we have, and so we actually have 4 projects in Southeast Alaska that will impact close to 2,000 acres of wildlife habitat improvements. So we've already started down that road. We were going to do the layout this summer and award the contracts this fall for work in 2026.
Okay.
But to make
that money might not be there.
We don't know. To make a meaningful impact on 360,000 acres of young growth that are sitting there ready, that is going to stem exclusion phase, we're going to have to do several thousand acres a year to start making a difference on the deer population.
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of
cash.
A lot of cash, a lot of work. But it can be, if the philosophy of management of the forest was such that it was focused on making those changes, we wouldn't be relying on habitat enhancement dollars to make that. That would be normal timber management practices and focus change in the way they're doing work on the landscape.
Yep. And then they just have to sign on to adhering to some areas of exclusion.
Or
kind of like they did with like stream bank setbacks and
That's right.
stuff like that, right?
And a lot of the early management virtually, again, not passing judgment, walked right up the bottom of the streams with cats and removed all the large woody debris. So as we're doing this young growth management strategy, we could provide the logs that the stream, actually Trout Unlimited and a few other folks with the Forest Service, where they're putting them back into streams to get those pools and the riffles and the stuff back in there for salmon habitat and stuff. So we can work to do riparian management thinning for deer, but providing the wood for the in-stream restoration projects at the same time.
And then we got to tackle, what about the Washington and Oregon folks?
Yeah, so we've got a group of folks
and California, I guess.
Yeah, so we got to work. We have a group of folks that are working for the Blacktail Deer Foundation and Mule Deer Foundation that's there. I know that there's some grants and some funding coming along. I just don't know what opportunities exist. I don't have a breadth of experience to know enough what's going on there. And that would be working with Oregon Department of Fish and Game, Washington Department of Fish and Game and stuff, and state and BLM and forest. Yeah, there is forests that are on that side of the highway and the Blacktail world on the Coast Range stuff. So I'm more than sure that these same kind of conversations and these same opportunity exists on those landscapes there. It's just, again, taking a look at where and why, because there are places that they're working great. We don't need to go in there and muck it up. There's stands on Prince of Wales Island that have regenerated with a spacing of trees wide enough that there is forage underneath there, and it's not in that slim exclusion phase. We don't need to be dumping money into that.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel that all the money, do you feel that the habitat is the way to go, or do you think that all the energy that people spend talking about predation, do you think it's a wasted energy?
No.
No.
No, there's a balance between those two. And I totally understand the predation aspects of this. And one of the things I've learned from my trail cameras is when wolves moves into that valley, the deer shut down. The deer don't come down to the lower elevations for 2 days when the wolves go through. There is a definite impact on the wolves on the landscape. So there's a lot of people saying, I go out deer hunting, I don't find any deer, and I see all these wolf sign. If you think about it, so if we went out hunting together at the time that the wolves were in there, the deer are all compressed in these smaller habitat blocks because of all of this older second growth out here. Where do we go? We go to where the deer are compressed to because we know that's the best places to hunt. And we go there and we find all these wolf sign. Let's say it's snowed and we see all the tracks and everything like that. We don't see any deer.
Yeah, I mean, no different than seeing a bunch of human boot tracks.
Yep.
Yeah.
So our conclusion that we draw is there's nothing but predators on the landscape and there's no deer there. When in fact, there's probably quite a few deer there. They just, for that time period, have slowly changed where they're at on the landscape.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a definite impact. I mean, I've got the graph. The rut was in full swing. I had wolves move into the camber area for a 2-day period. And when I finished plotting my rut, usually the rut is a big bell curve of activity. It starts up here. It goes crazy nuts. I have $50 a day past my 26 cameras, and it drops off to nothing. There's a little teeny bip for a second rut in the beginning of December. That rut split into 2 bell curves around that time that the wolves were there. It was a dramatic departure from the normal rut activity.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean the rut was stopping, but it was stopping where my cameras were. It was still going on up higher, I'm quite sure. They just weren't coming down and checking on, and the does weren't coming down and stuff like that in those lower elevation. They're like, "Oop, I'm out of here."
Yeah.
But I imagine there's like a more effective time of year for predator harvest, wolf,
Yep.
and you guys are
So
they're right. Mountain lions are starting to creep in, and certain
around
areas of Alaska.
I've been a few more. I'll
Okay.
tell you one of the
but black bear.
Yeah, so
be the
I've been involved in 3 studies with telemetry collars where we monitored fawns right at birth through the first 2 weeks of their lives. And the last one that Sophie did, and it basically agreed, not quite 50%, but like 48% of all Sitka blacktail fawns are taken in the first 2 weeks of their life by black bear. And what we didn't know is if a fawn
Can you tell
doe
me that
has
again?
48% of all blacktail fawns are taken in the first 2 weeks of their life by black bear.
Wow.
So, okay.
A lot.
That is a lot.
That's a lot.
So
One half the deer, boom,
by black bear in 2 weeks.
2 weeks were gone. And what we found out was, which we had no knowledge of, because then we got does on collar that had twins that were on collars. She would take a geomorphic, some kind of a structure, like a ridge or a hill or a river or a road or something, and she would put one fawn over here 200 to 300 yards away and one fawn over here 200 to 300 yards away, and she would live in between that and nurse both of those for that 2 weeks.
That's amazing.
So if she lost one, she lost only one instead of losing both of them. And so there's there's always been black bear there. The deer have grown up with black bear on the landscape. The deer have changed their habits to reflect the predation that the black bear put on those deer. And when there was a lot of black bear before 2004, when we were doing deer darting, there wasn't a day when I was calling to bring does in to shoot them to put radio collars on them, that I didn't have 1 to 2 black bears smoke into me. And I've had them get closer than you and I are and had them look past me to see where the fawn was.
Mm-hmm.
They were so locked into that sound. They knew I wasn't the fawn, and they didn't care about me. They just wanted to know where that fawn. I always thought, what would it be like if you set a fawn decoy out? Man, it would be boom, it'd be gone.
Oh wow!
They'd just bowl over it. So they're super focused on that fawn distress call. And most of the fawns, what we find is the black bear's feeding. The female has left them. the black bear may not be actively hunting, but it's feeding and digging up skunk cabbage in the spring. You've seen all that stuff. And all of a sudden, it must get a scent, or that fawn hears movement, thinks it's mom's, and lets out one little bleat. And you see this acceleration, and it's gone.
Yeah. So more effective based off of your research, more effective to target black bears in the ahead of time, right? Early spring.
Well, see, so this is why I get back to the habitat and the fact that we have a habitat challenge. Again, this is Jim Baichtal's world. I moved there in 1990. We had tons of clear cuts, tons of food, young clear cuts of that 2 to 15 year age.
Mm-hmm.
We still had all kinds of old growth. And we had good conductivity, even though the landscape was fractured. Lots of deer. Unbelievable number of bears. I can't even fathom to tell you how many bears were there. And wolves were numerous. I saw wolves weekly. I saw my third day in the woods, I still have my journal entry. I saw 27 black bears working in the woods the third day I was on the Prince of Wales Island. I mean, that's the kind of numbers you used to see. It became really popular to hunt black bear, and if you look at the graph, it went from 70 bears per year to almost 500 bears per year coming out of Unit 2.
Mm-hmm.
Harvested bears.
Harvested bears.
Wow.
That was when like the whole era.
Non-residents could take 2.
Yeah, the whole era of like bringing in truckloads of dog food and hunting bait stations off the road system,
and that crashed in 2005. Wonk. And the state started managing it first with a registration and now with a draw.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're doing an incredible job. I'm starting to see those older age class bears. So the first thing we lost was the big boars. Then we lost the older females. And when we started losing the older females, you start losing the knowledge of where to den, how to den, where to fish, and all that kind of stuff. And so there was an impact. Wolves, I think, have stayed relatively constant in that 300 to 350 estimate population in there. We've had another 20 timber sales since I got there on federal lands. And this young growth that was all this forage is growing up to be nothing. So now we have hardly any bears, but we're starting to see them come back. We still have wolves on the landscape. Why aren't we, and we haven't had a killing winter since 2011. Why aren't we seeing tons of deer? And I think the reason is because we're losing the habitat on the other end. And that's my take on the landscape there. That, that the wolves are still taking about the same number of deer that they always did. And the bears are too, but there's less bears.
Mm-hmm.
But the deer used to be able to, when there was tons of bears, the deer could still absorb losing 50% back. So we see a reduced deer number, not so much because of predation, because the predation is probably roughly the same, it's just a lower number, but it's the fact that we just lost those deer that aren't in those older stands of timber anymore, where they used to be. It doesn't bode well for us on Prince of Wales for the next few years. I don't know how to tell you this.
I mean, the next 80 years.
I'll be gone. You might still be there. But it's so I moved to Southeast Alaska and I grew up hunting Columbia blacktail in Washington State. And I moved up there and I just fell in love with these deer. And I realized like nobody knows anything about these deer. Like there's tons of stuff written on whitetail and there's quite a bit of stuff written on mule deer and stuff, but like nobody knows anything about that. And it was one of the reasons why in 2009, I bought the URL sitkablacktail.org, and in about 2013, Sophie and I and Todd created that webpage, sitkablacktail.org, the Sitka Blacktail Deer Coalition. I wanted a place somebody could go find out information about Sitka blacktail. So it's got all the stuff on translocations. It's got all the stuff in there about all of the written things, both peer-reviewed publications and not peer-reviewed publications, the stuff that's been written. It's a place you could go find out about Sitka blacktail. And I'm excited to see this the emphasis on blacktail throughout their region, both Columbia and stuff through the Blacktail Deer Foundation.
Are you going to roll sittleblacktail.org into Blacktail Deer Foundation? What you looking for?
Wait, no. We might put it up on the page, but if you look at the Blacktail Deer on the Blacktail Foundation thing, that's what Sophie and I have on our webpage.
Okay.
We said
that same photo?
That drawing, the characterization.
Oh, that
right up there. That right there.
Mm.
That's on our webpage.
Okay.
They needed something, and Sophie and I agreed that was a good thing to allow them to use that.
So, will the Blacktail Deer Foundation sit separate outside of Mule Deer Foundation, or is it just like a wing of the Mule Deer Foundation?
It's within, kind of like the difference between Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever, kind of a thing. And so...
who's the director?
Greg Sheehan came on as director. I don't know if you know Greg.
No.
He's awesome. He wasn't there very long, and Steve Belinda called me one morning and said, you need to get on a call. Steve's got an idea. And Steve says, what do you think if we created the Blacktail Deer Foundation? And I said 3 years ago, I told Steve I would give him 2.5 to 3 years on the emphasis that the Mule Deer Foundation was putting on blacktail, and I was kind of getting ready to retire again, and I said, I'll give you 3 more years. I'm all in. I want to see this thing be successful.
So what will your role with Blacktail Deer Foundation be?
To try to be an advocate for deer in Alaska, deer habitat work in Alaska, and the work that we could do. We have a full-time wildlife biology trained employee for the Blacktail Deer Foundation, lives in Juneau, Scott Lenora. Scott's awesome. Scott has been working up with Alaska Department of Fish and Game to do the modeling thing to answer the where. So they're doing across all of the Tongass, native and non-native lands, where should we, if we get dollars to do things, or if the agencies and the other landowners focus on a habitat restoration and a second growth industry, where should we be putting our efforts and work? And so they're working on that right now. And so I'm helping to develop chapters and be a spokesperson basically for the Blacktail Deer Foundation, and to educate people on why do we care?
Mm-hmm.
I love these deer. I every day I go to the woods, I try to go out and learn something. And I think every day I get schooled.
Which keeps you learning, right?
No, it is. Wow, I wouldn't have thought that. And every once in a while, the licking branch thing, there's not a lot of it. I went out in the snow to start GPSing trails, because if you go out there, there's 100 trails, hundreds of trails. You go out in the snow.
And I found you can put a camera on one of those trails, and there's a trail there, but it doesn't necessarily mean something's going to come down that trail.
But go out in the snow and GPS the 1 or 2 trails that are really ran, and you'll see they go like this, and they'll come to a node. Put your camera at that node. That's where 3 or 4 of the really used trails come together.
They come together in the high spots?
No. They come together. They're across the landscape. The deer trails will kind of mingle, and sometimes they intersect.
Oh.
And when they
you're not saying they intersect at a particular type of feature, just where they intersect.
And at that intersect, I'll almost guarantee you there's a licking branch somewhere right there.
The licking branch thing really surprises me. Sorry.
Yeah. Do you ever sit the licking branch?
Huh?
Do you ever set up and just sit on the licking branch?
Oh yeah. If you I got a YouTube channel, and if you go there, I have tons of videos I've put together of licking branches. You can watch buck after buck after buck come to these things.
Have you done like mock scrapes and mock licking branch? Have you set up a totally synthetic one yet?
No. I've thought about it. Well, first off, it would have to be a synthetic lure, because all natural lures are forbidden in Alaska. That's been outlawed because they're so worried about CWD getting it there. And so they're going to have to, it'll have to be something a deer attracted. I know several people that's used, I can't remember the name of the company that does the rope, hemp rope, and you soak it in some kind of a lure, and I can't remember it. Anyhow, they put that up and our bucks just beat the pee out of there.
Really?
The problem is we have so much rain, you've got to put lure on it about every 2 days.
Got it. You ever hear of a thing called Buckman juice?
No.
The urine from a man named Doug Dern?
No.
Might be worth checking out. I could try to get you a bottle of Buckman juice.
I can tell you that 2013, I had a really beautiful 4x4 with eye guards coming through one muskeg between 2 and 4 for 3 days. And I hung a tree stand, and I'm not a patient man. I hate being sitting there. But I went in and hung a tree stand, and I got out of that tree stand because I had to backpack it in 3/4 of a mile, and it got cold. I got cold because I sweated, and then after I hung it, I got down out of there, and the next day, my trail camera, 18 minutes after I got down, he pushed 3 does right by my stand. So the next day I got in there, and I sat from 7:30 in the morning until 2:30 in the afternoon, and this doe came out. Well, I had peed out of the sand.
Mm-hmm.
And she came over, and she smelled every place I had peed, and I had dropped the little rope that I had pulled the muzzleloader up by, and she mouthed that and stuff. And then she just slowly walked. She followed my tracks and smelled me, and the frost, I could see she was exactly following my tracks. We don't have any predators that come from above. So she never looked up. I was only 12 feet above her, but she never looked up. And she took off, and I cocked the gun and swung over to the opening. She come out, and he comes smoking into that opening, and I got that buck.
Whoa.
All right.
In fact, I'm not this good. It was an accident. But my camera was set on a 3-shot burst, and he ran by the camera, and it set it off. I mouth-grunned him to a stop, and I didn't know you could actually see me in the tree stand. And next thing you see is a big puff of smoke, and he's dying on the edge of the picture. It happened that fast. That fast.
Unreal. Now, we were told...
But she was not wigged out by where I had peed at all.
Yeah.
Just absolutely did not care. She was curious, really curious, but she wasn't wigged out by that at all.
Jim, we were told that you end up shooting a lot of bucks head on in the chest.
Yep.
And then you, what's your aiming spot?
The bottom center of the bottom throat patch. And you recover the round ball against the rear leg bone. You'll find this out someday.
I hope so too. But why, how's it end up head on so frequently?
Because they're coming to the call.
Oh God. Yeah.
They're coming to the call. The other thing is I try to set up in blind call all the time. And if he's sneaking in, what I do is I try to set up so if there's a ridge over here or a travel way that I think they might be using, I set up here knowing that the wind is blowing across me this way with an opening on this side so that he's going to come and he's going to try to circle behind me.
And you catch him crossing that opening.
And I catch him crossing that opening. And that's... A lot of times they'll still turn and look at you, but you can get them broadside if you just don't, like when I start calling, I don't move because they're locked on. They know the minute you blow that call from 500, 600, 700 yards away, they know the stump you're sitting by.
Mm-hmm.
That I've watched them across large, open, fast muskeg systems come at full tilt run across there to that spot. I'm quite sure because what I'm trying to do now is be a little more patient. I find that big bucks come in between 30 and 45 minutes.
What?
And I'm not that patient. I call for 10 or 15 and I want to go over there. I might do something different. I'm sure that there has been hundreds of bucks come to where I had just called and I'm no longer there. I'm off hunting something else. Or what I'll do is I frequently...
When you set up to call, how long you sitting there?
You should be there between 35 and 40 minutes.
Can I give you a little bit of math that Mercer Lawing, there's a man named Mercer Lawing gave me?
What?
So, similar situation. Calling bobcats. Predator calling bobcats. Bobcats will sometimes show up like 40 minutes later. So most guys that call coyotes, they'll sit for 15 minutes. That's kind of the rule of thumb, right? 15 minutes, everybody gets bored and they want to leave. But a bobcat might show up at 40 minutes. And I was talking to my friend Mercer, who calls tons of bobcats and used to do it professionally. He's like, yeah, but I can hunt twice as many spots at 20. Sure, some will show up at 40. Most show up before. So I'd rather hit twice as many spots than wait around for the one that might show up at 40.
Yep.
You know, like a calculated loss. So you're saying that when you run it, you don't sit there 40 minutes, but you should?
I should.
Or you could.
If I time myself and make it happen, I have tended to kill better bucks at the 30 to 45 minute period.
That is a long time.
Which means, Steve,
I look around, be like, nah.
so and you and I both know sometimes you call in there, boom, they're there.
Oh, that's what I'm looking for, the one that just is all of a sudden in your face.
Yeah. And we love that. That's exhilarating. I mean, my God, you're talking to an animal and all of a sudden it's like smack in your face, like at 5 feet. It's like crazy stuff.
40 minutes later.
Yeah.
And you're calling at what? Like, how often are you calling?
I usually start out with a really aggressive call sequence. I'm much louder, and I've been told that I'm too loud. Oh, no, that's half the volume. Yeah. I really crack on it.
But this is all the classic blacktail deer whistle that's sold in Alaska. That's what you're using.
No.
Oh, no.
I don't know. Can I use brand names here?
Oh, you don't have to give away any secrets either.
Oh, no, there's no secrets. You know the cow talk that came out of years ago, the first cow call that ever was made?
With the rubber band?
Rubber band, the plastic thing? That's what I've killed all my deer off of. I tighten that rubber band, and you use it for like the thorax in the back and can change my pitch. I start out really quiet.
Just make the noise with your mouth. Oh, okay, yeah.
I start out really, really quiet, and then I crescendo to louder and louder and louder. I'm reaching out further.
You know what? You just used crescendo right. I've used it wrong my whole life.
It's like
I thought the crescendo was the top.
No, it's the build.
The build. Someone told me that one time. My whole life, I said when it reached a crescendo, meaning the cap, the apex. They're like, no, the crescendo is the climb. Yeah. Good job, Jim.
It's like throwing a pebble into a pond. Your sound waves go out. You never know how it's gonna come back to you. And so I imagine that I know in my mind every time I call, some deer hears it. They may not choose to come, but they are hearing it. And so I start with a really loud bang. I try to get them to stand up.
Good.
And start. Now, they may not complete it, but I try to get them to do that. And so I start with that, then I go back down, and I build. And then if I'm doing a rattling sequence, I start out super loud and a roar grunt. Our deer are, when they're aggravated and they do the roar grunt, you'll hear that from 200 yards away. It is nuts how loud they are.
This is getting me excited for a hunt.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah, go on.
Anyhow.
Now that rattling stuff is interesting.
The other part of that is if a buck responds to a rattling sequence and you decide not to shoot him, keep it going. Innumerable times I've had a smaller buck come in first and Mr. Holy Jesus walk in later. Like, oh my God. It's just like 5 minutes later, you'll see these really big antler tips out in the brush moving around. And a lot of people will kill that buck and go over and deal with it, and they didn't realize that there was a smoker buck coming in. I had Sophie with another biologist there, and I called it a beautiful 3-point, and Sophie took that 3-point, and she jumped up, and I said, no, let's keep calling. And they went like, no, let's take pictures. And they ran out across the muskeg, and I was like, shoot. So I went over there, and I stepped away from my gun. I took my backpack off, and I laid my muzzleloader down, and I went over, and I grabbed their camera, and I hear snort. And I turned around, and there's this 4x4 with eye guards 20 yards away, steam just rolling off of him. And I looked at my gun, which was about 10 feet away, and that buck, and he took off, and he ran down the edge of the muskeg, and I grabbed my muzzleloader, and I rolled out into the muskeg, and he went down 60 yards and went in and stopped. But he stopped with a sweet spot between two trees, and he ought not to have done that. But, I mean, there was a classic example of he was hot, and he was looking for a fight, and he came in just virtually smoking.
Little off topic, but 60 yards, blacktail, broadside, is that an offhand shot for you? or do you look for a rest in that situation?
I almost always try to take a knee. I don't care if they're 5 yards. I can do it. I've done it. 70 yards, 80 yards last 2 years ago. I killed a buck in the Alpine. I had none of the rest on it. I was like, suck it up, Buttercup. And I aimed and just did a perfect shot on him. But aim small, miss small. I'll tell you, you only got one shot. You're not going to reload in any kind of lifetime of that deer running off or anything else. You've got to make that one shot. And that's the challenge. That's why I went to muzzleloading eventually, is just to challenge myself to make that one shot.
Yep. You've been married a hell of a long time, haven't you?
26 years on the 14th.
I think I asked you like your marriage advice. I can't remember what you told me. I did ask you your marriage advice. Did you tell me that you always treat your wife like a princess?
No.
That wasn't you?
No, that was Randy. Randy Brown.
That's right. But I did ask you in that parking lot on the island.
We did, yeah.
What would you tell me your plan was?
I went through the whole thing about why we got married in February. The fact that, like trapping and bear season started in March and through April, the trapping fell off. But then there was field season, and then it was hunting season for deer all the way down through into November. And then trapping season picked up again. And usually things were froze up in February, and that was a good time. And it happened to be a 3-day weekend that year with Valentine's Day on it. So we got married on Valentine's Day.
No, that's cute.
So I'd be home on anniversaries.
So have you guys got all those years of marriage just because good luck, or do you got like a strategy?
I think she's tolerable to me.
Okay, you just got lucky.
I got lucky. We got together, and Karen, I said, I hunt. And she says, I've known guys that hunt before. And I said, no, you don't understand. She does now. We get along good. She loves helping processing. She's got a few hunts with me and stuff like that, but mainly I go out and hunt by myself, and she does helps all the cutting up and stuff when I bring it home.
Okay. Has she shot a deer?
Nope. Not even interested. She's watched me kill a bunch, but other than that.
What'd she say when you get one? She get excited?
Oh, yeah.
She doesn't feel bad for the deer?
She'll point out every once in a while, like, we don't have any elk in the freezer.
Yeah.
I love those kind of statements. Like, go forth and kill elk. Like.
Hey, what's up with, you know how you're allowed to kill an elk on Prince of Wales if you run into one? As long as you have a deer tag or something like that?
I've seen tracks, and I found...
So you haven't laid eyes on one?
No.
I had a guy that was feeding me a lot of intel about where it was somewhere, but I never looked into it.
I can honestly tell you, in about year 2000, Karen saw a cow and a calf in the middle of the road just before you get to Goose Creek, Thorn Bay intersection there, coming to Thorn Bay. She came home and said, I just saw a deer that I don't know what it was. She had never seen a winter calf with their kind of that brushy mane. And I think I went to a Bugle magazine and I held up, so I said, look like that? She said, yes. I said, let's get in the truck. And we drove back out there and their tracks were there. I tracked it for 800 yards and I never caught up to them.
So they swam over.
Because brushy and shrubby is not very far from Zarembo. And so they went from Etland to Zarembo, and then they can come straight across brushy and shrubby across Snow Pass there and on to Prince of Wales. So there was dozens of sightings there when, so they first planted Roosevelt elk over at Etland Island, and then they came back with Rockies, and the Rockies went, I don't like this stuff, and they went.
So that's what was happening.
So they expanded. And there was a
3-year... The Rockies would strike off swimming.
There was a 3-year period where we had a lot of elk sightings on Prince of Wales Island. And I know 3 times during that period that I crossed tracks, and I tracked them.
But never put eyes on one.
Those were the years that we were doing the deer darting, and we were free-ranging darting. And getting off the road system and calling deer in and processing deer and stuff. And during those years were the same expansion years of elk. And I definitely saw elk tracks at remote areas on Prince of Wales.
So do you think right now there's none on Prince of Wales Island?
I don't think so. I think they've kind of settled down and they have a population on Zarembo now and they've all interbred. And
they're not striking off.
I don't think
anymore.
They're striking off. I'm sure some young male thinks that hey, there's a whole island over there that might be full of cows that I don't know about. So they might come over. But
You know, a buddy of mine, he one time, this is the same buddy was telling me about where to go look for elk, but he one time found he pulled 2 blacktail fawns out of the water. Couldn't find their mom anywhere. Little fawns, they were swimming. He got them both in his boat. One died right away. He got one wrapped in a space blanket, got it all warm back up again. Brought it up to the beach and it ran off. So some number of those things die like that.
That and also when they're walking on the beach, a bald eagle will take them and they'll grab them. And sometimes they let them go, but they've punctured their insides with I've found several that has the talon marks in them. But I've also had like 12-mile arm down to the back road down towards your place down there. I've saw where eagle was swimming across, you know how they'll get a salmon and they can't take off?
Yep.
Well, when it came out, it had a fawn in its talons. And
No shit.
There's a
grabbing them out in the water and drowning them.
So there's quite a we don't know what percentage of fawns get taken by eagles, but it is a predator of fawns.
Yeah.
Especially when they're those first 2 or 3 day wobbly leg kind of things. That's definitely a thing.
You know what you get, like, you get sort of this idea, you know, think about turkey hunt, if you're a turkey hunter or not, but you're calling turkeys and people are like, oh, you know, he's not going to want to cross the ditch, or, you know, you're trying to call him through the fence. You won't want to try to cross the fence. And people talking about stuff like that, like these little perceived obstacles, you know, when you're trying to call something in. When you get up there, there's so much water. And you think of a bear or deer coming down to the water and he's going to like kind of psych himself up and get ready, you know, and then go for it. When you're watching them, it's like they don't even think, man.
If you're a rutting buck on one
they
side,
just like in the water, swim out. They don't.
Yeah.
They're not like they're not like, whoo, I got to build myself up for the swim. It's like they don't even. They seem as comfortable swimming as they do walking.
I've had wolves swimming in front of my boat and get out on the beach and just shake off and sit down and howl at you, like whatever.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's wild to watch deer like come down bloop, into the salt water and just fast.
They're fast.
You can't even catch them in a canoe.
They don't even,
and also, they're on the other bank
they
and
don't
they're
even
gone.
have little webby things or nothing.
Yeah.
It seems like they really go well.
Yeah, it's just they don't give a shit. They just go.
Yeah.
They just swim. And you'll see them on these dinky little islands now and then. You're like, what in the hell is he doing on that island?
Actually, I think a lot of times, right about the end of May, the does go to those little islands to have fawns because there's less predators out there.
Well, I've seen that time of year, you see black bears striking out for little teeny islands, you know. And I always wonder if
that's what they're
hunting
doing.
fawns. Yeah.
Yep. I absolutely agree with that.
Well, how do people get involved with Blacktail Deer Foundation?
Go to the webpage, blacktaildeer.org. Yeah, blacktaildeer.org.
You guys are going to start chapters? People can start chapters?
We've got chapters. I think we had a lot of the mule deer chapters. We went to them and said, do you want to become a dedicated blacktail chapter? And I think most of them said yes. Some of them in California that have mule deer close, or in Washington and Oregon that also care about mule deer in eastern Washington and eastern Oregon and stuff like that. They were trying to figure out how to go both ways on that stuff, which is totally cool. In Alaska, it's a no-brainer.
Well, is there going to be a chapter in Craig?
Yep, there already is.
Really?
Yep. I'm the chairperson.
Oh. Can you join if you're just a poser from out of town?
Yeah, we'd like
Really?
you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sweet.
No, so you could go to the website. And that's the easiest way. There's several options on what how many years you do it and what level of chapter and whether you're sponsoring, and we'll eventually have a deal on there for life memberships and stuff like that. We've already done some chapter award stuff on Kodiak. We have a really functioning, really good chapter on Kodiak.
Oh, is that right? Really?
And we're not going to do anything on Kodiak for habitat. The habitat's fine on Kodiak. But what we're doing is helping the research the Alaska Department of Fish and Game is doing on Kodiak on Sitka black-tail deer. And that was the decision of the chapter up there, that they wanted to help the area biologist and his assistant up there work on the projects that they're doing. And there's a bunch of camera traps going on, and they're actually going to have the Blacktail Deer Foundation members running the the line of cameras and helping change out cards and batteries and stuff, which will save money for the ADFG.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So
that'd be some good volunteer work.
We're gonna be doing that in other areas. So we're gonna have a chapter in Juneau. We've got a chapter in Sitka, Prince of Wales, Ketchikan, Palmer, Wasilla. We want one in Fairbanks. We got one in Anchorage. I'm trying to think. I might be missing one. And of course, those guys don't have deer, but they go to Kodiak or they care, and that's what I tell people. We all have organizations that we support and we think about, and it's your choice to put your money where you best see fit. And the folks that really care about blacktail deer across the West and then Alaska, I hope they seriously consider Blacktail Deer Foundation.
I know I got a lot of buddies that are in the interior that's a part of their annual cycle, is because things wind down.
That's right.
And so guys go to Kodiak, Prince William Sound, Southeast. It's part of the annual deal is to get like another hunt in,
every year.
Which for them, hunting November is very late season.
Right. But they're also out of by that time the weather's deteriorating up in the interior. It's really cold. They can come down and be warm.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, it's I'm really excited to see the emphasis that Greg and the board on the Mule Deer Foundation board and stuff, and Steve and his conservation group is putting on this, because it's to me it's where I wanted to get to starting in about 2006, and I think it's exciting. It's just, for me, it's really exciting to see this focus on a deer that really had nobody focusing on him in the past. And I don't know what strides could be made. I don't know what landscape management policies can be changed or what, but I hope to be part of it.
Well, I think that if you are able to promote, like, you can definitely promote research, you can promote awareness of issues, right? And you can unify groups of people who love the animals to, look out for the best interests of the hunting. Even outside of the habitat work that you want to do, I think that doing those things and making a sort of like political body, so to speak, of blacktail fans who are educated and aware, I think that in and of itself is valuable.
One of the questions that come to us all the time: would you be supportive of intensive management programs on predators? And we focus on habitat. I want to be very clear about that. We don't take a stance on there unless some management would come down that would greatly negatively affect the deer population. But mainly we're looking at habitat and what can we do? Is there truly something that can be done for habitat? And I think there really truly is something that can be done for habitat. It's not going to be planting sagebrush, taking down fence. It's not going to be working on migration corridors and stuff. It's going to be working on conductivity of that animal on the landscape, and where's it going to get its next meal? And can we do better in creating those salad bowls out there for those things to go forage on?
And give them a way to get to the salad bowl.
And I want people to be able to have access to the areas that we create those opportunities for deer, so that they also can hunt those areas. I don't want to leave that rural resident or non-residents or anybody else out of that equation.
Okay. Thanks for coming on, man.
And you got to do it with a flintlock.
That's the new rule. Don't let that rumor get out there.
Yeah, that's true. No,
so I called for my best flintlock story. Is I called for an entire hour. I had trees like this that were being rubbed in this area. And I called for a whole hour. It was cold. It was like 15 degrees that morning.
So you're 35 minutes past your usual tolerance for sitting.
I timed myself for an hour. And at an hour, I was starting to get really cold. And I stood up and I kind of brushed around and I put my backpack on and I reached down. I picked up my flintlock and I come around my tree and there's this huge 5-point walking down the trail right at me. He's about 85 yards out. Again, steam rolling off of him. I remember the steam out of his nostrils that morning. It was so beautiful. He was all vivid, alder rubbed orange antlers. And he turns around and he goes back up the hill. I wasn't going to, all I would have had was an 85-yard shot with a flintlock offhand. I'm not going to take that on a Sitka blacktail looking straight at me. He turns around, walks back over the hill. I run up the hill, and I look, and its tracks go off, and it goes into this timber. And I had a can, one of the little long cans.
Mm-hmm.
And I reached down.
Only it's never that loud.
And I reached down, and I flipped that can, and he flew up out of the timber and came broadside at 50 yards. Turned broadside with the morning sun sitting against him, steaming. Reached back and scratched his butt with his antlers. And I dropped to go to one knee, and I couldn't see him over the curve. And I said, stand up. You do this at the range all the time. Focus, focus, focus. And when I shoot a flintlock, I try to imagine that round ball going clear through the target before I come out of my hold. And I reached up, and boom. And when the smoke cleared, he was gone. Just like he'd never been there. And I walked over, and here's a chunk of lung laying on the sphagnum moss. And I'm like, all right.
You're on the right track.
But then I went aboard, and I wish I could play in my brain the sun on his body and the steam rising off his body there at about 50 yards. That was a special moment.
Heck yeah, I'm fired up. Sign me up for the Blacktail Deer Foundation as well.
All right, thank you guys.
Man, thanks so much for coming out, Jim.
Blacktaildeer.org.
That's right.
That's easy to remember.
It is.
Blacktaildeer.org. Start a chapter, join a chapter.
And go check out Sitka blacktail.org. That's Sophie and Todd and mine's webpage. Learn
That's
about
where all
Sitka
the research
blacktail.
is.
Yep.
Got it. Thanks, dude.
All right.